Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue and green planet grow larger on the main screen. New Geneva was the last human colony in this sector. Once he took it, the entire system would belong to the Zephyrian Empire. His three-fingered hands gripped the rail as he smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. The war against the humans had been going well. Very well. In just 2 years, the Zephyrian fleet had taken 12 human worlds. The secret was simple. Humans relied too much on their technology. Their weapons needed power. Their shields needed energy. Their computers needed electricity. Take that away and humans became helpless. "Sir, we are in position," reported his second-in-command, Captain Zixra. Her purple skin gleamed under the bridge lights. "All ships ready to deploy the dampening field." Vextar nodded. The energy dampening field was their greatest weapon. It was the invisible bubble that stopped most forms of electrical energy from working. Human plasma rifles would shut down. Their energy shields would fail. Their communication devices would go silent. Even their vehicles would stop moving. It was like pulling the plug on their entire civilization. "Deploy the field," he ordered. On the screen, he watched as waves of energy spread out from his ships. The field covered the planet like a blanket. Almost immediately, the lights on the human cities began to go out. The orbital defense platforms went dark and started falling toward the planet. The human ships that tried to escape simply drifted in space like dead metal. "Field is active and stable," reported the weapons officer. "All human technology on the planet appears to be offline." "Excellent." Vextar's smile grew wider. "Begin the orbital bombardment. Target their military bases first, then their government buildings. Leave the residential areas mostly alone. We need workers for the mines." The Zephyrian ships opened fire. Bright beams of energy struck the planet's surface. Explosions bloomed like flowers across the continents. The human military bases disappeared in balls of fire. Their spaceports turned to ash. Their communication towers fell down like broken trees. For 6 hours, the bombardment continued. The humans had no way to fight back. No way to call for help. No way to even know what was happening beyond their local area. They were blind, deaf, and powerless. "Sir," called the sensor operator, "we're detecting movement on the surface. Large groups of humans are leaving the cities." Vextar looked at the sensor readings. Thousands of heat signatures were moving away from the burning cities and heading toward the mountains. "They're running," he said with satisfaction. "Like frightened animals." "Should we target the refugee columns?" asked Captain Zixra. "No," Vextar said after thinking for a moment. "Let them run. It will be easier to round them up in the mountains than to hunt them through ruined cities. Besides, scared humans make better workers than dead ones." The bombardment ended. Smoke rose from dozens of impact sites across the planet. The great human cities that had stood for centuries were now broken shells. Their proud military was scattered ash. Their government was silent. "Prepare the ground forces," Vextar ordered. "Full assault formation. I want 3 divisions to land at the primary spaceport. They will secure the area and begin setting up our base of operations. The remaining forces will pursue the humans into the mountains." "Sir, is that necessary?" asked Captain Zixra. "The humans have no weapons, no vehicles, no communication. They're just civilians now." Vextar turned to look at her. His yellow eyes were cold. "The humans are dangerous even without their technology. They have a saying, 'A cornered animal fights the hardest.' I will not make the mistake of underestimating them." But even as he said this, Vextar felt confident. What could unarmed humans do against Zephyrian soldiers in powered armor? His troops carried plasma weapons that worked even inside the dampening field, because they used internal power cells. Their armor was nearly indestructible. Their sensors could see in complete darkness. The first shuttles launched from the fleet. They carried 2,000 elite Zephyrian soldiers. Each soldier was trained from birth to fight. Each wore armor that could stop bullets and energy beams. Each carried enough firepower to destroy a building. As the shuttles entered the atmosphere, Vextar watched the feed from their cameras. The human cities were burning ruins. Bodies lay in the streets. Some humans were still trying to flee on foot, carrying whatever they could. They looked pathetic and helpless. "The humans are gathering in what appears to be an old fortress built into the mountainside," reported the lead shuttle pilot. "Estimated 3,000 refugees." "No signs of military resistance?" "Perfect," Vextar said. "They've trapped themselves. Signal all units. Surround the fortress, but do not attack yet. Let them think about their situation overnight. Fear will make them surrender more easily." But even as his forces landed and began their march toward the mountains, Vextar felt a small worry in the back of his mind. The humans had given up too easily. In all his years of war, he had never seen a species surrender so quickly. Most fought to the last soldier even when defeat was certain. Were the humans really so different, or were they planning something? He pushed the thought away. What could they possibly be planning? They had no weapons except what they could carry. No communication except their voices. No vehicles except their feet. They were trapped in a stone fortress with no food and no hope. Tomorrow he would finish what the orbital bombardment had started. Tomorrow the last human resistance in this system would end. Tomorrow, another world would belong to the Zephyrian Empire. But tonight, as his soldiers made camp in the ruins of human civilization, Commander Vextar found sleep difficult to come by. Something about this victory felt wrong, too easy, too clean. In the morning he would understand why. Dawn came slowly over the ruins of New Geneva. Commander Vextar had slept poorly, troubled by dreams he could not remember. He stood in his command tent, looking at the tactical display that showed his forces surrounding the human mountain fortress. "Report," he ordered, as Captain Zixra entered the tent. "All units are in position, sir. We have the humans completely surrounded. Sensors show approximately 3,000 heat signatures inside the fortress. No signs of weapons or technology." Vextar studied the display. The fortress was old, built into the side of a mountain. It looked like something from ancient times, made of stone and metal instead of modern materials. The humans had chosen their prison well. There was only one way in or out, a narrow canyon that led to the main gate. "Have they tried to communicate?" he asked. "No, sir." Complete silence. "Our scouts report they can see humans moving around inside, but they're not trying to send messages or surrender." This bothered Vextar more than he wanted to admit. In his experience, trapped enemies either fought desperately or begged for mercy. They did not simply wait in silence. "Perhaps they're praying to their gods," suggested Captain Zixra. "Humans are known to be religious." "Perhaps." Vextar was not convinced. "Order the 1st Battalion to advance into the canyon. Tell them to be careful, even trapped animals can bite." The Zephyrian soldiers began their march. They moved in perfect formation, their powered armor gleaming in the morning sun. Each soldier was over 7 feet tall and weighed half a ton with their equipment. Their footsteps echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Major Corax led the advance. He was a veteran of 20 campaigns and had never lost a battle. Through his helmet display, he could see the fortress growing larger ahead. It looked primitive and crude compared to Zephyrian architecture. The walls were made of cut stone. The gates were simple metal. There were no energy shields or automated defenses. "Pathetic," he muttered to his sergeant. "How did humans ever build a space civilization living in caves like this?" But as they moved deeper into the canyon, something began to feel wrong. The walls on either side rose higher and higher. The path became narrower. It felt less like an advance and more like walking into a funnel. "Sir," called one of his scouts, "I'm seeing movement on the cliff tops." Major Corax looked up through his sensors. At first he saw nothing. Then a shape moved against the sky, a human figure watching them from above. Just observers, he decided, probably trying to count our numbers. Let them look. They'll see how hopeless their situation is. Back at the command post, Vextar was watching the advance through satellite feeds. His soldiers looked magnificent marching through the canyon, like an unstoppable metal river flowing toward the human fortress. Nothing could stand against such power. "Sir," called his intelligence officer, "we're picking up some unusual readings from the fortress." "What kind of readings?" "Heat signatures are moving in organized patterns. Like they're preparing for something." Vextar frowned. "Preparing for what?" "They have no weapons, no technology. What could they possibly be preparing?" "Unknown, sir, but the movement patterns suggest military organization, like troops forming up for battle." "Impossible," Vextar said, but even as he spoke, he felt that familiar worry growing stronger. "They're civilians, refugees. What military training could they have?" In the canyon, Major Corax was beginning to share his commander's concerns. The walls around them were now so high that the sky looked like a thin blue line far above. His soldiers filled the canyon floor from wall to wall, but somehow this felt like a weakness instead of strength. If anything happened, there would be no room to maneuver. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're losing contact with the rear units. The canyon walls are blocking our signals. Switch to emergency frequencies, Korax ordered. He did not like being cut off from command. But the mission was simple enough. Reach the fortress and accept the human surrender. What could go wrong? The fortress gate was now visible ahead. It was a massive metal door set into the stone wall. There were no guards visible. No weapons pointing out at them. The battlements above looked empty. It's too quiet, muttered his sergeant. Korax agreed. By now the humans should be shouting demands or pleas. They should be waving white flags or firing desperate shots. Instead, there was only silence. Halt the advance, he ordered. Something was very wrong here. Set up a perimeter. I want sensors on full sweep. Check every shadow, every window, every crack in the wall. His soldiers spread out as much as the narrow canyon allowed. Their sensors probed the fortress ahead. The results were confusing. There were definitely humans inside. Lots of them. But they were not where humans should be. They were not cowering in the deepest rooms or gathered around their leaders. Instead, they seemed to be positioned throughout the fortress in what looked almost like defensive formations. Sir, called his sensor operator, I'm detecting large amounts of metal inside the fortress. Refined metal, not just the building materials. What kind of metal? Iron and steel, mostly. Shaped into... I'm not sure. Long, thin objects. Thousands of them. Korax felt a chill run down his spine. Long, thin metal objects could mean only one thing: weapons. But what kind of weapons could humans make without technology? Without power tools or advanced materials? Back at the command post, Vexitar was studying the same sensor readings. The more he looked at them, the less he liked what he saw. Captain, he called to Zixra, pull up the files on human history. I want to know how they fought before they had energy weapons. Zixra worked at her console for several minutes. When she looked up, her purple face had gone pale. Sir, human military history goes back thousands of years. Before they developed energy weapons, they used primitive tools, sharpened metal, chemical explosives, projectile weapons that used gunpowder. Gunpowder? Vexitar had heard of it, a crude chemical explosive that some pre-space civilizations used. Our armor can stop gunpowder weapons easily. Yes, sir. But according to these files, humans also used edged weapons. Swords, spears, axes. They fought in close combat for most of their history. Vexitar stared at the display. Close combat, hand-to-hand fighting with metal blades. It seemed impossibly primitive. But then he remembered something that made his blood run cold. The dampening field only stopped energy-based technology. It had no effect on simple machines, no effect on chemical reactions, no effect on sharpened metal. In the canyon, Major Korax was reaching the same terrible conclusion. The humans had not fled in panic. They had not given up in despair. They had retreated to a position of strength and prepared to fight with the only weapons that still worked. Weapons that the Zephyrian Empire had forgotten could even exist. The fortress gate began to open. The fortress gate opened with a deep grinding sound that echoed through the canyon. Major Korax raised his plasma rifle, ready for whatever desperate last stand the humans might attempt. His soldiers did the same, their weapons humming with deadly energy, but nothing came out of the gate. For long minutes, the Zephyrian battalion waited in the narrow canyon, watching the dark opening ahead. The silence stretched on, broken only by the wind whistling through the rocks above. Sir, whispered his sergeant, maybe they're too scared to come out. Korax was not so sure. His sensors were going crazy, detecting movement all through the fortress. Hundreds of humans were definitely in there, and they were definitely moving around, but they were not doing what trapped civilians should do. They were not panicking or crying or begging for mercy. All units advance slowly, he ordered. Stay in formation. Watch for... The attack came from above. Rocks began falling from the cliff tops on both sides of the canyon. Not random stones, but carefully aimed boulders that crashed down among the Zephyrian soldiers. The powered armor protected them from injury, but the falling rocks broke their formation and sent them scrambling for cover. Contact above. Contact above, shouted the communications officer. Korax looked up through his helmet display and saw human figures on the cliffs. They were not throwing rocks by hand. They were using some kind of machines. Simple machines made of wood and rope and metal. Catapults, trebuchets, ancient siege weapons that required no electricity or advanced technology. Return fire, he ordered. Plasma beams lanced upward, striking the cliff faces in brilliant explosions. But the humans had good cover among the rocks and they knew how to use it. They would appear long enough to launch their crude missiles, then vanish again before the return fire could reach them. More rocks fell. Bigger ones now. Some of his soldiers were knocked down, their heavy armor making it hard to get back up quickly in the narrow space. The perfect formation was breaking apart. "Sir," called his sensor operator. "Movement from the fortress." "Lots of movement." Korax spun around to look at the gate. Humans were coming out now. But these were not the scared refugees he had expected. These humans wore metal armor that looked like it came from ancient times. They carried shields made of wood and metal. And in their hand, "By the void," breathed his sergeant. "Are those swords?" They were indeed swords. Long blades of sharpened steel that gleamed in the sunlight. The humans also carried spears with sharp metal points, axes with heavy metal heads, and bows that fired wooden arrows with metal tips. Major Korax almost laughed. Almost. These primitive weapons were thousands of years old. They belonged in a museum, not on a battlefield. His soldiers wore armor that could stop energy beams and explosive shells. What could sharp sticks and pointy metal do against such protection? "Open fire!" he commanded. "Cut them down!" Plasma beams streaked across the canyon. The energy weapons worked perfectly, their internal power cells unaffected by the dampening field. The beams struck the human formation and mostly missed. The humans were not standing still like targets. They were moving fast, using their shields to deflect the energy beams. More than that, they seemed to know exactly where the shots were going to be. They ducked and weaved and rolled with the skill of trained warriors. "How are they moving so fast?" demanded Korax. Human beings were supposed to be slow and weak compared to Zephyrians, but these humans did not look slow or weak. They charged across the canyon floor like a living wave of metal and fury. Their battle cry echoed off the walls, a sound full of anger and determination. The two forces met with a crash that shook the canyon. The first Zephyrian soldier to face the human charge raised his plasma rifle for a point-blank shot. A human warrior with a long sword ducked under the beam and brought his blade up in a perfect arc. The sword should have bounced harmlessly off the advanced armor. Instead, it sliced through the rifle's power coupling like it was made of paper. The Zephyrian stared in shock as his weapon died in his hands. The human's blade came around again, this time finding the joint where the helmet connected to the chest piece. Somehow, impossibly, the primitive sword found the one weak spot in armor that was designed to have no weak spots. "Impossible," Korax shouted into his radio. "The humans have primitive weapons. How are they penetrating our armor?" But even as he asked the question, he was seeing it happen all around him. Human swords were slicing through power cables and hitting armor joints with surgical precision. Spears were finding gaps between plates that should not have existed. Axes were striking exactly where the armor was weakest. It was as if the humans had studied Zephyrian equipment for years and knew every flaw, every weakness, every vulnerable point. In the command post, Vextar was watching the battle through satellite feeds and could not believe what he was seeing. His elite soldiers, the finest warriors in the galaxy, were being pushed back by humans with metal sticks. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our armor is impenetrable." Captain Zixra was frantically checking her databases. "Sir, I'm finding references to something called metallurgy in the human files. It seems they have thousands of years of experience working with metals. They know how to make blades that can cut through almost anything. But our armor is made of advanced composites, quantum-bonded materials." "Yes, sir. But the joints and connections still use traditional metals for flexibility." "And the power systems?" "The humans seem to know exactly where to strike to disable our equipment." On the battlefield, Major Korax was learning this lesson the hard way. A human warrior with twin swords had just disabled 3 of his soldiers by cutting their power cables with quick, precise strikes. Without power, their armor became dead weight that made them slow and clumsy. "Fall back," he ordered. Fighting retreat to the mouth of the canyon, but retreat was easier said than done. The canyon was narrow, his soldiers were heavy, and the humans were fast. Worse, more humans were appearing on the cliff tops, not just with catapults now, but with bows. Arrows began to rain down on the Zephyrian formation. "Arrows cannot penetrate our armor." Korax shouted to rally his troops. He was right. The arrows could not get through the main armor plates. But the humans were not aiming for the main plates. They were aiming for the joints, the seams, the gaps where one piece of armor met another. Some arrows carried ropes that tangled around legs and weapons. Others had hooked points that caught on equipment and pulled it loose. And some arrows, Korax realized with growing horror, had been designed specifically to fight Zephyrian soldiers. The metal points were the exact size and shape needed to slide between armor plates. The shafts were precisely the right length to reach vital systems. The humans had not just retreated to this fortress. They had prepared for this exact battle. As his force struggled to retreat through the canyon, Corax tried to make sense of what was happening. How could primitive humans fight so effectively against advanced technology? How could they know so much about Zephyrian equipment? The answer came to him as a human warrior's sword sliced through his radio antenna, with one perfect cut. These humans were not primitive. They were not helpless refugees who had never seen war. They were soldiers, professional warriors who had studied their enemy and prepared for this moment. And now, trapped in a narrow canyon with nowhere to run, Major Corax began to understand what his commander had felt the night before. This victory was feeling less and less like a victory. Commander Vextar stood in what had once been the human governor's office, now serving as a meeting place between two very different kinds of warriors. Across from him sat General Marcus Chen, the human who had just handed the Zephyrian Empire its first major defeat in over a century. The human looked ordinary enough. Middle-aged, gray-haired, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of many years under different suns. He wore simple military clothing with no fancy decorations. His only weapon was an ancient sword that hung at his side, its metal worn smooth by countless hours of practice. "You wanted to discuss terms," Vextar said, trying to keep his voice steady. Around the room stood guards from both sides, the Zephyrians in their damaged powered armor, the humans with their metal weapons and cloth uniforms. "I did," General Chen replied, "but first I think you deserve an explanation. Your soldiers fought bravely today. They deserve to understand why they lost." Vextar wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain some dignity in defeat, but he found himself curious despite everything. "Very well. Explain how primitive humans defeated the finest military technology in the galaxy." Chen smiled, but there was no mockery in it. "You made several assumptions about us. The first was that we were primitive. The second was that our weapons were inferior. The third was that technology always beats tradition." He gestured to one of his soldiers who stepped forward carrying a sword. The blade gleamed like silver in the light. This sword was made using techniques that are 3,000 years old. The metal was folded and refolded hundreds of times to create layers of different hardness. The edge can cut through almost any material while the spine remains flexible enough not to break under stress. Vexatar examined the weapon more closely. What he had dismissed as crude metal was actually a masterpiece of engineering. The patterns in the steel showed incredible skill and knowledge. "But that is just the tool," Chen continued. "The real weapon is the training. Every human soldier spends 4 years learning to fight with edged weapons before they ever touch an energy rifle. We study anatomy, metallurgy, physics, and psychology. We learn to read an opponent's movements, to find weaknesses in armor, to fight as individuals and as units." "Why?" Vextar asked. "You have advanced weapons. Why waste time with ancient skills?" "Because we have learned from our history," Chen said seriously. "Humans have been fighting wars for 10,000 years. We have seen empires rise and fall. We have watched civilizations destroy themselves with their own technology. We know that the most advanced weapon is useless if you cannot use it." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the battlefield where Zephyrian soldiers were being helped by human medics. 200 years ago, humans fought a civil war that nearly destroyed our species. Both sides had such advanced weapons that they canceled each other out. Energy shields stopped energy weapons. Jamming systems blocked communications. Computer viruses infected targeting systems. In the end, the war was decided by soldiers with knives and determination. Vextar began to understand. "You prepared for the possibility that your technology might fail." "More than that," Chen said. "We prepared for the possibility that our enemies might take our technology away from us. Your dampening field was not the first of its kind. We have faced similar weapons before. Each time we fell back on skills that no enemy can disable with machines." Captain Zixra, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "But how did you know so much about our equipment? Your soldiers struck our weak points with perfect precision." Chen turned back to them with a grim smile. "Because we study our enemies as carefully as we study ourselves. Every piece of Zephyrian equipment that we captured in previous battles was taken apart and examined. We know where your power cables run. We know which joints in your armor are weakest. We know how your weapons work and how they can be broken. He walked over to a table and picked up a damaged Zephyrian helmet. This armor is excellent for fighting other energy weapon users. The main plates can stop almost any beam or projectile, but it was designed by people who forgot that wars can be fought in other ways. His finger traced the joint where the helmet connected to the chest piece. This connection uses a traditional metal alloy for flexibility. A sword blade of the right size and hardness can cut through it easily. Once this joint is severed, the helmet's life support fails and the soldier must surrender or suffocate. You turned our greatest strength into our weakness, Vextar said quietly. We did what warriors have always done, Chen replied. We adapted. We learned. We overcame. There was a long silence in the room. Finally, Vextar asked the question that had been weighing on his mind. What happens now? Do you plan to destroy my fleet? No, Chen said immediately. Humans do not fight for conquest or glory. We fight to protect ourselves and our freedom. Your fleet can leave the system unharmed along with all your surviving soldiers. Vextar was surprised. You would let us go? After we attacked your world? We would prefer that this war end here, Chen said. But we want something in return. We want your word that the Zephyrian Empire will not attack human worlds again. I cannot speak for the entire empire, Vextar said. I am only one commander. But you can speak to them, Chen said. You can tell them what you learned here. You can explain that humans are not the easy targets they appear to be. Vextar looked around the room at the human soldiers. They stood calmly, confidently, without the need to prove their strength through intimidation. They had already proven it on the battlefield. What message would you have me carry? He asked. General Chen sat back down and looked directly into Vextar's eyes. Tell them this. Humans do not abandon the old ways when we learn new ones. We add the new to the old. Every generation of human warriors stands on the shoulders of all who came before. When you take away our advanced weapons, you do not make us helpless. You force us back to the methods we have perfected over thousands of years of constant war. He paused, letting the words sink in. Tell them that humans are most dangerous when they appear weakest. Tell them that we have contingency plans for every possible defeat. Tell them that underestimating humanity is the fastest way to lose a war. And if the Empire does not listen? Vextar asked. Chen's expression grew cold. Then they will learn what our ancestors learned long ago. It is possible to defeat humans in battle. It is possible to destroy human worlds. But it is not possible to conquer the human spirit. We will fight with starships or with swords. We will fight in space or on the ground. We will fight until we win or until there are no humans left to fight. But we prefer not to fight at all, he added, his voice softening. We prefer to live in peace, to explore the stars, to learn and grow. War is something we are good at, not something we enjoy. Vextar stood slowly, his mind racing with everything he had learned. The humans had given him a choice: carry their message back to the Empire, or face the consequences of continued war against an enemy that was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. I will carry your message, he said finally. I will tell them what I have seen here. Whether they listen, that is not my decision to make. That is all we ask, Chen said, standing as well. Your soldiers will be returned to you within the hour. Your ships are free to leave whenever you choose. As Vexatar prepared to leave, he turned back to the human general. One last question. If your people are such skilled warriors, why did you not fight back when we first attacked? Why retreat to this fortress? Chen smiled one final time. Because the best warriors know when to fight and when to wait. We let you think you had won so that you would follow us here, to ground of our choosing under conditions that favored our strengths. The greatest victory is the one that requires the least bloodshed. 3 hours later, Vexatar stood on the bridge of his flagship as it pulled away from the human world. Below, he could see the lights of the cities beginning to come back on as the humans repaired their technology. But he knew now that they did not really need it. Captain Zixra approached him with a data pad. Sir, my report to the High Command is ready for your review. Vextar took the pad and read through it carefully. It contained everything: the failed invasion, the human tactics, the devastating defeat of their forces. But most importantly, it contained General Chen's message. Send it, he ordered. Send it to every ship in the fleet, every base in the Empire, every commander who might one day face humans in battle. As his ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying news of defeat and warning throughout the Zephyrian Empire, Commander Vextar found himself hoping that his leaders would be wise enough to listen. Because if they were not, if they chose to continue this war against humanity, they would discover what humans had been trying to tell the galaxy for centuries, that the deadliest weapon in the universe was not the most advanced technology, but the warrior who knew how to fight without it. The retreat through the canyon became a nightmare of metal and blood. Major Corax's elite battalion, which had marched in perfect formation just hours before, was now a scattered mess of soldiers trying desperately to escape the human assault. The humans fought like nothing he had ever seen. They moved through the battle like dancers, their swords and spears striking with deadly precision. Every cut found a weak point. Every thrust hit exactly where the armor was vulnerable. It was as if they could see through the advanced materials to the soft flesh beneath. How many casualties? Corax shouted to his sergeant over the sound of battle. 40% of the battalion is down, sir. Most are disabled, not dead, but they cannot fight. This was somehow worse than if the humans had simply killed his soldiers. A Zephyrian warrior expected to die in battle if necessary, but to be defeated by primitive weapons, to have their advanced armor cut apart like cloth, to be reduced to helpless metal statues. It was humiliating. A human warrior with a massive two-handed sword appeared in front of Corax. The major raised his plasma rifle and fired at point-blank range. The beam should have turned the human into ash. Instead, the human's metal shield deflected the energy beam at an angle, sending it harmlessly into the canyon wall. The shield was not just any piece of metal. It was polished to a mirror finish and shaped to redirect energy weapons. The human's sword came down with tremendous force. Corax tried to block with his rifle, but the blade cut through the weapon's barrel like it was made of soft wood. The major stumbled backward, now armed with only the grip and trigger of his destroyed weapon. "Your armor has 17 weak points," the human said in perfect Zephyrian language. "Would you like me to demonstrate?" Before Corax could respond, the human's sword flicked out in a series of lightning-fast strikes. The major felt his equipment failing piece by piece. His communicator went dead. His targeting system shut down. His life support began to fail, but he was not killed. The human could have driven that sword through any of several gaps in his armor, but chose not to. Instead, Corax found himself alive but completely helpless. His advanced suit of armor turned into an expensive prison. "Surrender," the human said calmly. "Your soldiers are beaten. Call for a retreat before more of them are hurt." Back at the command post, Commander Vexitar was watching his elite forces be systematically destroyed by humans with metal weapons. It should have been impossible. It was impossible. Yet it was happening. "Sir," Captain Zixra reported, her voice shaking. "We're receiving a transmission from Major Corax. Put him through." The major's voice came over the speakers, distorted by damage to his equipment. "Commander, request immediate, full retreat." "Humans are..." "Not what we expected. Major, report your status." "Battalion is..." "Defeated, sir. Humans have..." "Superior close combat training. Our weapons, ineffective against prepared enemy. They know our equipment better than we do." The transmission cut off in a burst of static. Vexitar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His sensors showed most of the battalion's power signatures going dark one by one. The humans were not killing his soldiers, they were disabling them with surgical precision. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They are humans. They have primitive weapons." "Sir," Zixra said quietly, "I think we made a mistake. We assumed that because their weapons were simple, they were simple. But what if the opposite is true? What if they chose simple weapons because they are better at using them?" Vexitar did not want to believe it, but the evidence was right in front of him. The humans were not refugees or civilians. They were warriors, professional soldiers who had trained for this exact scenario. "Pull up everything we have on human military history," he ordered. "I want to know how they fought before they had energy weapons." The data that came up on his screen made his blood run cold. Humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years before they ever left their planet. They had perfected the art of killing with sharp metal long before they discovered how to split atoms or bend space. More than that, they had never stopped training with these ancient weapons. While other species abandoned their primitive past when they developed technology, humans kept both. They studied the old ways alongside the new ways. They maintained warrior traditions that went back to the dawn of their civilization. "Look at this," Zixra said, pointing to a section of the file. "Human soldiers are required to train with edged weapons as part of their basic education. They call it traditional combat skills. We thought it was ceremonial. We thought it was just for show. It was not for show, Vextar said grimly. It was preparation. They knew that someday they might face an enemy who could take away their technology, so they made sure they could still fight without it. On the battlefield, the last of the Zephyrian soldiers were laying down their weapons. Those who could still move were helping their disabled comrades. The humans formed a circle around them, swords and spears ready, but they did not attack the defeated enemy. A human commander approached the group. He was older than the others, with gray hair and scars that spoke of many battles. He wore simple metal armor and carried a sword that looked ancient but well-maintained. "I am General Marcus Chen of the New Geneva Defense Force," he said in clear Zephyrian. "Your soldiers fought bravely, but they are defeated. Will you surrender honorably?" One of the few Zephyrian soldiers who could still speak activated his external speakers. We do not understand. How did you defeat our technology with primitive weapons?" General Chen smiled grimly. "You made the same mistake that many enemies have made throughout human history. You assumed that newer meant better. You thought that because our weapons were old, we did not know how to use them." He gestured to his soldiers around them. "Every one of these warriors has trained with sword and spear since childhood. We study your equipment manuals as carefully as we study our own history. We know exactly how your armor works and, more importantly, how it fails. But why?" the Zephyrian asked. "Why maintain such old skills when you have advanced weapons?" "Because," Chen said, "we learned long ago that technology can fail. It can be taken away. It can be turned against you. But skill, training, the knowledge of how to fight with nothing but your hands and a piece of sharp metal, that can never be taken away." He looked up at the sky, where the Zephyrian fleet still orbited the planet. "Your energy dampening field was meant to make us helpless. Instead, it brought the fight back to ground where we have never stopped being masters." In the command post, Vextar was receiving reports from his other forces across the planet. The same scene was playing out everywhere. Human defenders were emerging from hidden positions with ancient weapons and destroying his advanced soldiers through superior skill and knowledge. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "the humans are requesting a meeting. They want to discuss terms." "Terms?" Vextar was confused. "They want to surrender?" "No, sir. They want us to surrender." Vextar looked at his tactical display. His ground forces were scattered and defeated. His orbital bombardment had done little more than clear away the humans' modern equipment and force them to fight on their own terms. Terms where they held every advantage. For the first time in his military career, Commander Vextar faced the possibility that the Zephyrian Empire had just lost a war to an enemy they had completely underestimated, an enemy who had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength.